Okay, today we're going to be talking about obsessive compulsive disorder, and also known as OCD. And it's often underdiagnosed because it can be hard to recognize the signs and realize that this isn't necessarily normal healthy behavior, and then ask for help. And so because of that, it's often undertreated. So with OCD, there are generally two parts, obsessions and compulsions. So obsessions are, so when we think of obsessions as just, regular people, we often think of something that we're really excited about and it's something that we enjoy. But when it comes to OCD, obsessions are not enjoyable. And in this context, it is an unwanted, unpleasant thought, image, or urge that repeatedly enters your mind, causing feelings of anxiety, disgust, and unease. And then this is where the intrusive thoughts come in. That's kind of what they are. They're, I think we've talked about it a little bit before, but that's kind of what happens. You get an intrusive thought over and over again that you don't want, of course. And then, so for example, some people have upsetting thoughts about harming themselves or others. But this doesn't mean the person actually wants to harm themselves or others, but their brain just consistently scares them of the thought of doing so. And then this is where the compulsions come in, because it's kind of like a cycle. It starts with obsessions and then it leads you to compulsions. So a compulsion is a repetitive behavior or mental act that a person feels they need to do to temporarily relieve the unpleasant thoughts brought on by an obsessive thought. So if somebody has an obsessive fear of harming someone, they may not keep any knives in their house and feel like they need to check their kitchen to make sure there are still no knives. It's kind of like that. And that can look very different for everybody in whatever circumstance. But yeah, that's kind of how it works. And so OCD always involves obsessions and compulsions, but you might not necessarily be able to see that in another person. They may have milder symptoms to where you don't see it, and they can manage a little bit better to where they can hide it until they go home or whatever, or they have mental compulsions, which means their compulsions are carried out in their mind instead of acting it out, counting or making a list over and over in your head.
Yes.
So a person with OCD generally can't control their thoughts or behaviors when it comes to compulsions and obsessions, even when those thoughts or behaviors are recognized as excessive. And people with OCD don't generally get pleasure from performing the behaviors or rituals, but a lot of people feel a brief relief from the anxiety that was caused by those thoughts, from the intrusive thoughts and those feelings. And people with OCD experience problems in their daily life due to these thoughts and behaviors. It disrupts.
Sure.
And pretty much kind of one of the main factors of deciding if someone has a mental illness or not, diagnosis and stuff like that, is if it gets in the way of your daily life. And that's how people and professionals measure the severity of it. How much does it interfere with your daily life?
Well, that's good information.
That's a kind of a rule that they use. So some behavioral symptoms of OCD are compulsive behavior, hoarding, impulsivity, or meaningless repetition of words or actions. And some emotional symptoms are fear, depression, hypervigilance, apprehension, guilt, agitation, and a constant feeling that something is not right. That they can't quite put their finger on it, but just something's wrong. So, which is very common with anxiety as well, because OCD and anxiety are very similar, but OCD is kind of more specific. And then some more common symptoms with OCD. A lot of people have food aversion, where they're very picky and they don't eat certain things for a number of reasons, texture, how it makes them feel, whatever. A lot of people have nightmares, and then also rumination, like we talked about, I think it was last time, repeatedly going over thoughts over and over and over. So when it comes to diagnosis, professionals usually have some sort of questionnaire that first explores the possible compulsions and obsessions and the severity of them. And then they assess how much insight, that's what a lot of times they use the word insight, or awareness the individual has when it comes to their symptoms. Like a basic example would be someone being afraid or obsessed with the number 13. Some people are aware of the fact that there's no reason to fear danger when it comes like to the number 13 or being around it or whatever. Other people completely believe that the number 13 is evil and is bad and can hurt people and stuff like that. But it's kind of interesting to note though that even though someone may be aware that there is no real danger with like the number 13 or whatever is in the situation, they still have compulsions and to kind of like protect themselves and others from it just in case. So even if they like see that it's kind of like unnecessary and you don't need to do this compulsion, they still do it. So it's not a conscious choice. That kind of shows you that it's more of an illness, it's an actual illness, and you can't just tell yourself to stop checking and it works. It does not work like that. It's not just a switch that you can turn off, sadly.
That is sad.
Yeah, and a lot of people with OCD have other mental illnesses. One study that I was reading said that 90% of US adults with OCD have at least one other mental illness.
So partners.
Yes, definitely. And yeah, a lot of times it'll be like depression and or anxiety and different stuff like that.
Yeah, I would think it would go really hand in hand with anxiety.
Definitely. It kind of like feeds off of each other and then just creates a problem.
Just torment.
Yes. And of course, like pretty much all mental health conditions, we're not exactly sure the cause of OCD, but some things that can lead to developing OCD are brain abnormality. Like some people with OCD have areas in their brain of unusually high activity or low levels of serotonin. And that's not absolute. It's not for every person with OCD, but just researching and like looking at brain scans and stuff, they have seen that a lot of people with OCD have these things. So
low serotonin.
Yes, for OCD specifically. And serotonin is one of the happy chemicals in your brain that controls your mood and stuff like that. And another thing that can lead to developing OCD is genetics. Sometimes it can run in the family. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you have OCD and you have a kid, you're like, passing this awful thing along so you don't ever want to have children. It's not a for sure thing, like I said, but it can run in the family sometimes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it in family living. In fact, I think I've had a little bit of it.
Yeah. And then, of course, traumatic events and especially neglect as a child, they kind of like compensate for that, so their brain kind of like goes to the edge of it and like protects themselves as much as possible. That's what kind of the compulsions are, protecting themselves from whatever obsessive thought they have. Or a lot of times when I've like talked to people with OCD, it's not just like thoughts. It is thoughts, but it can be images. They're like something, not like just a picture, but like, how like your brain works when you're like remembering something that happened. It kind of like shows a story in your head. It's kind of like that, but not with something that happened in the past. Like it's just like a made up scenario. And they're scared. Like yes, your brain is showing you that. Like, see, this could happen, and then it freaks you out. So that can happen too, and it happens more than I kind of realized when you first hear of OCD, you don't really think of that, but that is common. And with OCD, it sometimes develops under specific circumstances. Like women can sometimes develop OCD after they had a child, or like right before, like during pregnancy, or right after their baby is born. And kind of like postpartum depression, like the levels in your body are very abnormal to how it usually is, so a lot of things can happen. So like that can cause moms to do things like obsessively check their baby to make sure they're breathing, or being very worried about harming the baby, or not sterilizing the milk bottles correctly, and different stuff like that. And with, especially being a new mom, those feelings kind of happen anyways, but with this, it's like to the extreme, like constantly checking over and over, even though you did like 30 seconds ago. So like I said, it gets in the way of daily life. And so for treatment and therapy with OCD, it can't be cured, sadly, but that does not mean by any means that there's no hope. You can definitely like treat symptoms and ease distress a lot. Generally, for the first line of treatment for OCD is CBT, like we talked about, is pretty much the go-to one, cognitive behavioral therapy. And then on top of that, an SSRI, which is most of the time an antidepressant. That's just a type of medication, and that boosts the serotonin in your brain. And these medications specifically can help with like feelings of anxiety and depression that are caused by OCD thoughts. Like you get those intrusive thoughts and then you feel depressed or anxious because of those thoughts, and this can help treat that. So it's like treating the symptoms instead of the illness. That's sadly where we're at, but that is, realistically, that's what's happening. That's just where we're at right now. But hopefully we can, move forward with research and stuff.
In
yes, definitely.
Psychiatric science.
But it's interesting to know that when it comes to an SSRI or SRI or whatever medication, most of the time when they use it to treat OCD compared to depression, the dosage is way higher.
Really?
Because like you don't, for some reason, just the way it works is like a lot of times you don't get any like ease off your symptoms or whatever, ease your distress. You don't, like, it doesn't put a dent in your symptoms until it's way higher. That's just how it is with OCD. So
you would see much more milligrams than you would for something like just depression. You'd see that,
yeah,
it'd be a higher dose.
Yeah, like these are just, random numbers, but like 50 milligrams for, depression, and then for OCD, 200.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of like where it is.
Wow, that's good knowledge to have, because sometimes you do wonder, like.
Right, yes. And even it goes along, like ADHD is kind of the same way too. It just is just how it is with your brain. It's just, sick in different ways, so.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists also use antipsychotics for, along with antidepressants to kind of like boost their effect. And sometimes that works well for people, and then other times it does not. So it really just depends on your body. So, like I said, we're treating the symptoms, not the illness, so that can be kind of
yes,
difficult.
It's
to
a new
do.
science.
Yeah.
Trial and error.
And so there's a few different options when it comes to therapy, and a treatment plan for talk therapy for OCD will look different for everyone. Some people will need to focus more on controlling impulses, compulsions, and other people need to work on recognizing that certain thoughts and beliefs are irrational obsessions, like the number 13.
And most family members saying, that's just crazy thinking like that.
Which doesn't, sadly, is not very helpful.
No. But you're like, why do you keep doing that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, like, it will look different for everybody. So it really just depends on the thing that is causing the most problems at that point in your life. There's also a type of therapy that I'm new to discovering. It's called ERP, Exposure and Response Prevention Therapy, and that I don't know if you guys have heard, but like generally I hear, like exposure therapy to cure your fear of something specific. Like if
Are you into the fear?
Yes, that's based off of this. So this is a form of CBT actually. It's kind of like a branch.
No, like don't step on a crack when you break your mother's back. So you go ahead and step on the crack and you see that your mother's back then you get broke.
Yes, it's kind of like that. Honestly, yes.
I mean,
Yeah. So the theory behind this therapy is that if you slowly expose the individual to their trigger, they learn how to cope and kind of like realize that they aren't in danger. And like back to the knives example, if they might start with thinking about a knife and then seeing a picture of a knife and then seeing a real knife and then eventually touching a real knife, like that's just kind of how it goes. And that's not exact, so don't take that too close, but that's just kind of like to give you an idea of what it kind of looks like, which works for some people but isn't necessarily the best for everyone. Because if a person isn't ready to face their trigger and you force them to do so, it can be very harmful, just emotionally. And so, but just so you know, you have to voluntarily agree to ERP therapy. They can't just trap you in a room and make you face your worst nightmares.
No,
so this is voluntary. But yeah, it's very good for some people, but you have to be ready, like emotionally and mentally for that.
Well, it would be almost like you're confronting your psychosis, and just even though psychosis is there, being able to reason this is not real.
Yes.
It's not really gonna happen.
Yeah, you have to be kind of like at that stage where you're okay with accepting that this isn't real, but you are seeing it. And some people aren't ready to do that, so you have to feel out where you're at in that situation and what the best option is. So a lot of times with OCD, even if the person with OCD explains their disorder, people often struggle to really understand symptoms they can't see or have never experienced themselves. And it's like saying to, maybe a weird example, but it's like walking up to an alcoholic and saying, just stop drinking.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. It's like, okay, this is not
just cut it off.
Yeah, this
just stop thinking like that.
Right, it's not very helpful and can be harmful sometimes.
And truth is I guess their brain's like a ticker tape. And you can't cut it off.
Right. And yeah, that's why you need to get help and therapy and stuff like that. And this is the type of thing that you cannot fix on your own by yourself. That's why we need support from our family, our community, like therapists, psychiatrists, something. You can't stay in your room alone and just like fix it yourself. That's just, it doesn't work that way. So, and people with OCD also usually report that their symptoms get worse the more they are criticized and blamed for these emotions and compulsions, and that generates more anxiety inside them.
So people with OCD, do they have a tendency to be in denial before they face it?
It really depends, but yeah, it can be, because kind of like with depression, people don't really see that it's a problem because they're used to it. They just think it's their normal daily life. Everybody does this or whatever, but yeah, it can be hard to like see for themselves.
Yeah, if that's the way it's always been, you think other people are the same way.
Right, or like, this is just how I am, this is how I have to be. But yeah, there is help, and you don't have to do those things. So yeah, it can be hard to recognize for sure. And
but it is tormenting.
yes, it definitely is. And it's very exhausting to have those obsessive thoughts that just scare you, and then having to do these things to make sure to keep everybody safe, because you're trying to protect everybody because you don't want these things to happen. So it's definitely exhausting. So, and it's important to know that these behaviors are a sign of OCD and not a personality trait. So that can, and
So I guess a personality trait would be what? Like a type A personality that was a perfectionist and driven?
yes, it's somebody that's kind of neat. They like things orderly.
Have to have it orderly?
Right, that can be a personality trait. But if you have to do those things because like you're scared that something bad is gonna happen, or you feel bad until you do those things and like straighten or clean or whatever, that's where it goes into OCD and obsessive and compulsions.
So there's a fine line.
There is, and it can start as a personality trait and then get worse. So you gotta keep a close eye on it and just like monitor your behavior and the reasons why you're doing something. So it can be definitely hard to recognize.
Well, it makes you feel, like I would say that I kind of border on it, no doubt, because if things aren't in order, or let's say things are out of order, and then I'll start cleaning compulsively, because if I clean compulsively, it makes me feel like everything's in order.
Right.
And my world has to be in order, because it's when it's out of order, I feel out of order.
Right, yeah. And this is like compulsions or, you know, stuff like that are just kind of like you being able to do something that you have control over. Kind of helps you feel like you have control over something instead of like feeling out of control completely. That's kind of where compulsions come in, you know, because nobody likes feeling like they're out of control. Nobody does. That's just how we work. And so that kind of helps you have like control over this situation. So, and when I was researching this, you know, just checking to make sure I didn't miss anything, I found a couple things that said that they weren't medical journals or anything like that. They were just random articles that people wrote. But they said that you either have OCD or you don't. There is no gray area, which is not true. You can have obsessive compulsive tendencies and not have the actual disorder.
Okay, that's good to know. I need that diagnosis tonight.
Yeah.
Okay, Jill, thank you.
Yes. And
Because I know I have some OCD tendency.
yes, yeah. And that's not just me making that up. That's me talking to professionals and looking at stuff. So yeah, you can definitely have obsessive compulsive tendencies or OC tendencies.
But not have the disorder.
Yes.
Because my oldest son, he makes lists. Lists in his head, lists. And until he makes lists, he feels like he's out of control. Well,
yeah, that can be an OC tendency.
and then goodness knows if you have to add something to the list. You might have to make a new list.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, like with all mental illnesses, it's important to be present and patient because this is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. Like I said, it's not a switch that you just turn off, even though we all wish it was. You know, it's easy fix, it's much faster, less painful, but that's just, you have to remind yourself that that's not how it works. You know, we're slowly healing. It's a process. And when supporting someone like a loved one or whoever, try to learn as much as you can about the illness just in general, but also about their triggers because they're different for everybody. Some people with OCD, because when you hear OCD, a lot of people automatically think, oh, they're a clean freak. But some people, quite a lot of people with OCD, their house is messy. It's a disaster. It's because they're so busy with their other symptoms, they don't have time to like keep their stuff tidy and clean. They are so busy checking to make sure they turned off the light switch or did it a certain amount of times to make sure everything's okay. So it doesn't always have to be a clean
Right, it
freak.
doesn't mean that everything, all the
You can
things are in
have-
alphabetical order.
Right, you can have OCD and your house be a mess, and you know, or even like with straightening things. You don't have to, you can be okay with having things like as a mess, but also still have OCD. So there's just a lot of different ways OCD can manifest. So just like make room for that. And so try to learn their triggers and act accordingly, but it's also important to have healthy balance and not like walk on eggshells and reorder your entire life. But it's also important to be understanding and encouraging and trying to like move forward in the healing process. So it's kind of a hard balance to like maintain sometimes, but it's definitely.
It would be hard being a child underneath a parent with that disorder.
Yes, definitely.
It would definitely be a bondage situation, especially because if they're driven by fear, then it will make for a very tense environment, no environment of freedom.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And so, yeah, we also have a family support group. You know, NAMI Golden Triangle, we have a family support group that's very good because, you know, if you want to join this small support group, go ahead. If you want to join somebody else's support group, that's fine. Just like, it's really important to get support somewhere, somehow, to know that you're not alone and there is
other people are suffering just like you are. I mean, that always makes a difference.
And people have like certain tips and tricks from experience in support groups that you can get that you won't find or like get that information from a psychiatrist or a mental health professional. So I'm not saying, you know, go to support group and that's what the only therapy you're doing, but they have good like random coping skills that you would never think of, but because they have been doing this so long that they know certain things.
They have things that your psychiatrist is not.
Yes, exactly. So those are, it's definitely a very good thing to find a support group that you are comfortable in
and I'm sure a lot self-medication, marijuana, and alcohol to slow it and stop it.
Yes, because you feel like you're always tense and on edge, so those things can kind of.
And the other alternative to that would be like Xanax.
Yes, yes.
And that's no life.
Right, yeah. It's definitely hard to deal with, for sure. And definitely get a psychiatrist and a therapist.
There's got to be part of it, not to mention just the evil that's running rampant, but the mental illness has increased so much that it does make you wonder. That's why the drug, you know, the self-medication is just going through the roof too.
Yes, definitely. And that side of it, and when like so many people are on antidepressants, so many people that don't have a mental illness. They were just sad for a certain amount of time or feeling, you know, low, or like the depressed versus having depression. They're going through a depressed period and then they get on this medication and then they just stay on this medication. And that messes with your brain chemistry too, because if you don't need it and you're giving it to your brain anyways, that's gonna create this whole weird cycle of depending on it. And if you stop taking it, it can, you know, make you feel very bad emotionally.
And bottom out. I had brain tremors. I know that I was put on Effexor. I was going through menopause. I was having hot flashes, and my OBGYN put me on Effexor. And I'd been on it for several years, and coming off of that, it took me a year.
Yeah.
And I had like weird things with my brain, like it would feel like brain tremors. My emotions were all over the place, and really after 5 years of Effexor, oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that's a whole nother problem too, is getting on that medication and staying on it even though your brain doesn't really need it. So
it's scary.
Yes,
it's very scary how quick we are to write scripts.
Yeah, that's why I definitely highly recommend getting a therapist. For sure. If you don't want to take meds or you're not there yet, that's fine, get a therapist. If you are ready to take meds, still get a therapist. It's definitely very beneficial.
Talk things through.
Yes, and I don't remember if I've said this before, but if you don't like your therapist and you're not clicking, that's okay. Get a new one.
Absolutely.
And they don't it's their job. They're supposed to support you, and if you're not meshing well with them and it's just not working, and it's more tiring for you to go to them instead of like.
Or it's a burden. It's not something where you're looking forward
you're
to
dreading
it.
going.
I mean, sometimes you click with people, sometimes you don't.
Exactly.
It's personalities.
Yes, it's just like socializing. If you meet somebody and it doesn't work, that's okay. You don't hate them, but you move on to somebody else. It's kind of like that. It's definitely okay to find a new therapist for sure. And there are a lot of options. You just have to look for them. So, and NAMI Golden Triangle is always here to help when those situations, when they come up, because it can be very exhausting being in a mental health crisis, or this stage is right before a mental health crisis. It's like very tiring and it's lonely a lot of times too. So yeah, most of the reason we exist at NAMI Golden Triangle is to help support you through those steps and make sure.
Well, and then even I have a friend that's a nurse, and her grandson's like 22, and he used to have a lot of suicidal ideation, and he has insurance, but trying to maneuver, if you need a psychiatrist,
yes.
Where do you go? You go to Spindletop? Well, if you don't tell them you're suicidal, and you try to jump through the hoops, there's so much hoops to jump through that you really get frustrated and you give up.
Right, and Spindletop is very overwhelmed with all the people they try to help as many people as they can, but they definitely are overwhelmed. Yes, there's a lot of people trying to.
So I'm going to refer her to call NAMI, and I can help her.
Yes, definitely. Call or.
I just got through texting her today.
Yeah, definitely.
About, her asking me about where she could go, and I don't know why I didn't think about just telling her to call y'all. But.
Yep. We're here for anything, and if we can help you, we'll figure out a way to.
Absolutely.
Or figure out a person that does know how to help you. Like,
You'll connect. You'll connect them where they need to go.
Yes, that's what we're here for. And if you yourself have OCD, it's good to find like healthy outlets, like exercising, getting that energy out. Like with the anxiety talk we were discussing, it can just monitor yourself. It's different for everybody, but exercise can be a good outlet. All that like
endorphins being released, and just healthy.
Yes, so it really just looks different for everybody. And setting goals and achieving them is also very rewarding and helpful for anybody, but also with OCD too.
Yeah. And hobbies. Hobbies are good too.
Yes, hobbies are good.
Something fun.
Yes, something that you don't have to work to enjoy. Something that's just natural and easy. That's not a burden for you to do. And that can be kind of hard to find sometimes, but it is possible. You just gotta.
Because your OCD can kick in on that.
Yes, it can.
You're
And sometimes you have a hobby that works really well, and then you wake up one day after weeks of loving that hobby, and then it's work. And the OCD kind of kicks in, and you feel like you have to fix a situation or whatever. So then you gotta move on to the next hobby. And that's okay. But yeah, and that happens with ADHD a lot. People get like hyper focused on one thing and love it, and that happens a lot of time with food too. You like love this food and you'll eat it every day, and you can't think of a better food. You crave it, you want it every day.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you're like, I don't even like this.
So I don't want it anymore.
Right? Absolutely. Yeah, that's just how it is. It's kind of funny, but that is how it works.
We did cheddar peppers at Sonic for a while.
Yep.
Just things like that where you just eat it, and then you're like, oh.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's some OCD, but I don't have the disorder.
OC tendencies.
I just have the tendency.
Yes. There you go. And we have, like I said, the family support group, and we also have what's called a connection recovery support group. Is for people with mental illnesses, and we meet once a month. And you can always message us or call us, email us, whatever, for the details.
And then maybe when we move, we can have a group.
Yes, that would be awesome. Yeah.
That would be really good.
So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for that.
That's great. It's always good.